When giants fall, Commander Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of Kepler Station, watching death approach across the stars. The massive space station, humanity's pride in the outer rim, trembled as another shockwave rippled through its titanium frame. Beyond the reinforced windows, the void blazed with weapons fire and dying ships. The Void Hunters had found them. 3 months ago, when the first reports came in from the Andromeda sector, nobody believed them. Entire star systems simply vanishing, consumed by something that left nothing behind except empty space and cosmic radiation. The Stellar Coalition's finest scientists dismissed it as sensor errors or natural phenomena. Even when refugee ships began arriving with tales of mechanical nightmares that ate planets, the 12 species of the Coalition remained confident in their superiority. They were not confident now. Admiral Vextar, the reptilian commander of the Coalition's Third Fleet, materialized beside Chen through a holographic projector. His scaled face showed none of the usual arrogance that marked his species. Instead, his golden eyes held something Chen had never seen before in a Zephyrian fear. "Commander Chen," Vextar's voice carried the weight of defeat. "My fleet has lost 60% of its vessels. The Kalahari dreadnoughts are gone. The ethereal crystal ships have been reduced to space dust. These machines adapt to every weapon we possess." Chen nodded grimly. She had been watching the battle unfold for the past 6 hours. The Coalition had assembled the largest fleet in recorded history to defend Kepler Station. 200 warships representing the most advanced military technology in known space. Ships that could crack moons, weapons that manipulated matter at the quantum level, shields that bent reality itself. None of it mattered. The Void Hunters moved through space like living darkness, their ships defying conventional physics. They were not built, they were grown, evolved, perfected over eons of consumption. Every time a Coalition weapon struck them, they absorbed the energy and adapted. Plasma cannons that had carved through asteroids now barely scratched their hulls. Quantum torpedoes that could destabilize stars simply vanished into their adaptive armor. "What about the evacuation?" Chen asked, though she already knew the answer. "Proceeding as planned," Vextar replied. "All Coalition personnel are being transferred to the escape pods. The station will be abandoned within the hour." Chen turned to face the hologram, her jaw set with determination that surprised the alien admiral. "The humans are staying." Vextar's head tilted in confusion. "Commander, I appreciate the courage of your species, but this is not a battle that can be won through bravery alone. Your weapons are even more primitive than ours. If our quantum disruptors cannot penetrate their defenses, what hope do your kinetic projectiles have?" "You'd be surprised," Chen said quietly. The truth was, she had been studying the Void Hunters since the first reports arrived. While the Coalition's military minds focused on bigger weapons and stronger shields, Chen had taken a different approach. She studied their patterns, their behavior, their methods of adaptation. What she found both terrified and fascinated her. The Void Hunters were not random destroyers. They were harvesters, collectors of technology and knowledge. They consumed civilizations not out of malice, but out of an insatiable hunger to evolve. Every ship they destroyed, every world they devoured, made them stronger and more adaptable. But adaptation took time, and every advantage had a corresponding weakness. Captain Marcus Webb entered the observation deck, his engineering uniform stained with coolant and burned with plasma residue. The human contingent on Kepler Station was small, barely 300 personnel serving as technical support for the Coalition forces. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in stubborn determination. "Sarah," Webb said, using her first name despite military protocol. "In times like these, formality seemed pointless. The Coalition ships are pulling back. Admiral Vextar wants to know if we're ready for evacuation." Chen looked at Webb, then at the holographic admiral. "Tell them we're implementing Protocol 7. Vextar's eyes widened. He had heard whispers of human military protocols, strange tactical doctrines that made no sense to civilized species. "Commander, what exactly is Protocol 7? Chen smiled grimly. "Something we learned on Earth, Admiral. When you're outgunned, outmanned, and facing impossible odds, you don't fight fair. You fight dirty." The next few minutes were chaos. While Coalition ships continued their retreat, the human personnel scattered throughout Kepler Station began implementing a plan that would have been considered madness by any rational military strategist. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief xenobiologist, sealed herself in the research labs with samples of Void Hunter technology captured from previous battles. Captain Webb and his engineering teams began stripping non-essential systems from the station, converting them into weapons that no civilized species would ever consider using. The humans were preparing to wage biological and chemical warfare against machines that had conquered galaxies. "This is insanity," Vextar protested as he watched Chen's team's work. "You cannot defeat these entities with such primitive methods." "Maybe not," Chen admitted, "but we're going to make them pay for every inch of this station." The first Void Hunter ship reached Kepler Station's outer perimeter 3 hours later. It was massive, easily the size of a Coalition dreadnought, but shaped like no vessel any species had ever constructed. Its surface writhed with mechanical tentacles and sensory arrays, constantly adapting to the environment around it. Smaller hunter units swarmed around it like metallic parasites, each one capable of consuming a fighter craft whole. The Coalition's remaining ships held their position at maximum range, their commanders unwilling to sacrifice more vessels in a hopeless battle. They watched in fascination and horror as the small human contingent prepared to face an enemy that had destroyed civilizations. Chen stood in the station's command center, surrounded by displays showing the approaching swarm. Her team was small compared to the massive Coalition crews, but each human knew their role perfectly. They had trained for scenarios like this since childhood, preparing for battles where victory was impossible and survival was the only goal. "Dr. Vasquez, are you ready?" Chen asked into her communicator. "As ready as I'll ever be," came the reply from the research labs. "I've weaponized every biological agent we captured. These things may be machines, but they use organic components in their adaptive systems. If I'm right about their neural networks, we might be able to give them a very bad day." "Webb, status on the kinetic systems. Modified and ready," the engineer reported. "I stripped the station's artificial gravity generators and converted them into magnetic accelerators. We're basically turning the entire station into a giant railgun. The Coalition thinks our weapons are primitive. Let's show them what primitive can do." The first Hunter units reached the station's outer hull. Their cutting beams, designed to slice through the most advanced armor, began carving into Kepler Station's relatively simple titanium steel composite. What they found inside, however, was not what they expected. Instead of the usual energy conduits and computer systems found in Coalition technology, the Hunters encountered something their adaptation protocols had never seen: chemical explosives, biological agents, and kinetic weapons that operated on principles so basic they were almost incomprehensible to an intelligence that had evolved beyond such crude methods. The first biological mine detonated when Hunter scouts entered Section C. The explosion released a cloud of modified Earth bacteria that Dr. Vasquez had engineered specifically to attack the organic neural pathways the Hunters used to coordinate their adaptive systems. For the first time in recorded history, Void Hunter units began to malfunction, their perfect adaptation disrupted by something as simple as engineered microbes. "It's working," Dr. Vasquez shouted over the communication system. "Their adaptation cycles are being disrupted. They can't process organic biological attacks because they've never encountered anything so primitive." Chen allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction before the real battle began. The Hunters, confused but not defeated, began pouring into the station in greater numbers. Their mechanical forms filled the corridors, cutting through barriers and consuming everything in their path. But the humans were ready for them. Captain Webb triggered the first kinetic mine as a group of Hunters entered the main corridor. Instead of energy or plasma, The explosion sent thousands of tungsten ball bearings flying at hypersonic speeds. The Hunter's adaptive armor, designed to absorb and redirect energy attacks, offered no protection against simple kinetic force. Several units were shredded instantly, their mechanical bodies unable to adapt quickly enough to purely physical damage. "Impossible," Admiral Vextar whispered as he watched the tactical display. "They're actually fighting them." The battle raged through Kepler Station's corridors and chambers. Human defenders used every dirty trick they had learned during centuries of warfare on Earth. Improvised explosive devices, biological weapons, chemical agents, and kinetic traps that turned the station into a maze of death for the invading hunters. The Void Hunters, for all their technological superiority, had never encountered an enemy like humanity. Their adaptation protocols were designed to counter advanced energy weapons and quantum technologies. They had no frame of reference for enemies who would use disease as a weapon, or who would turn their own space station into a giant explosive device. Chen coordinated the defense from the command center, watching as her small team of humans proved that sometimes the most primitive solution was the most effective one. The hunters were learning, adapting to each new trick, but adaptation took time. And time was something humanity had learned to exploit. "All units, fall back to Checkpoint 7, Chen ordered. "Prepare for final phase." As the surviving humans retreated deeper into the station, they left behind a trail of destruction that had cost the Void Hunters dozens of units. For the first time since their arrival in Coalition space, the Hunters had encountered meaningful resistance. But the real battle was just beginning. The human solution. The inner core of Kepler Station had become a fortress of improvised death. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the reinforced command bunker, surrounded by displays showing the Void Hunters systematically consuming the outer sections of the station. Her small team of humans had held them off for 6 hours longer than anyone thought possible, but they were running out of space to retreat. "Status report," Chen called out, her voice steady despite the odds stacked against them. Captain Marcus Webb wiped sweat from his forehead as he monitored the engineering systems. "We've lost sections A through F. The Hunters are adapting faster now they've figured out some of our biological weapons. Dr. Vasquez's bacterial agents are only slowing them down instead of stopping them." Dr. Elena Vasquez looked up from her portable laboratory, where she had been working frantically to develop new countermeasures. "They're learning to filter out the biological components, but I've noticed something interesting. Their adaptation process requires them to maintain neural links with their command ship. Every unit needs to stay connected to share information." Chen's eyes lit up with understanding. "You're saying they have a central nervous system?" "Exactly. Cut the head off the snake, and the body dies. The problem is, their command ship is staying well outside our weapons range. It's probably assuming we can't threaten something that large with our primitive technology." Chen turned to Captain Webb. "What about the gravity generators you converted? What's their maximum range?" Webb ran quick calculations on his tablet. "In a standard configuration, maybe 50 kilometers. But if we overload the entire station's power grid..." He paused, understanding dawning on his face. "Sarah, you're not thinking what I think you're thinking. Turn the entire station into a weapon," Chen said grimly. One massive kinetic projectile aimed directly at their command ship. Admiral Vextar's hologram flickered to life in the bunker. The reptilian commander had been monitoring the human resistance with growing amazement. "Commander Chen, my sensors show increasing hunter activity around your position. We are prepared to extract your team if you can reach the docking bays." "Negative. Admiral, we're going to end this." "How?" "You have fewer than 200 personnel remaining, and you're surrounded by thousands of hunter units." Chen looked at her team Webb with his grease-stained hands still working miracles with salvaged equipment. Dr. Vasquez, surrounded by biological samples and chemical compounds that would horrify civilized species, and the other humans who had volunteered to stay behind when evacuation was offered. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that had conquered galaxies. They were also the most dangerous thing the Void Hunters had ever encountered. Admiral, I need you to relay a message to all Coalition ships. Tell them to clear a firing corridor between this station and the Hunter command vessel. In 30 minutes, we're going to show you what happens when humans stop playing defense. The next phase of Chen's plan would have been impossible for any other species. It required the kind of desperate creativity that only came from evolving on a death world where survival meant adapting to impossible situations. While most civilized species developed technology to overcome obstacles, humans had learned to turn the obstacles themselves into weapons. Captain Webb and his engineering team began the most dangerous modification in the history of space warfare. They connected every power source on Kepler station generators, fusion reactors, backup batteries, even the emergency life support systems into a single massive circuit. The station's modified gravity generators were rewired to create a focused magnetic field capable of accelerating the entire station to a significant percentage of light speed. Dr. Vasquez worked on a different problem. The Hunters had adapted to most of their biological weapons, but she had one final card to play. Using samples of Hunter technology, she had developed a viral program designed to attack their neural networks. It wouldn't destroy them, but it would cause confusion and disruption at a critical moment. This is beyond reckless, Admiral Vextar protested as he monitored the humans' preparations. You're planning to use your entire station as a kinetic projectile. The forces involved will tear it apart before it travels half the distance to the target. Maybe, Chen admitted. But we've got one advantage you don't understand, Admiral. We're not afraid to die for a cause. The concept was alien to most Coalition species. Their civilizations had evolved beyond the need for individual sacrifice, relying instead on technological solutions and tactical superiority. The idea of deliberately destroying oneself to achieve victory was both horrifying and incomprehensible to them. But humans had been doing it for millennia. As Webb's team completed their modifications, the Void Hunters continued their systematic advance through the station. They had learned to counter most of the human weapons, adapting their armor and tactics with each encounter. Their mechanical forms moved with increasing confidence, no longer surprised by the primitive but effective defenses they encountered. They had no idea what was coming. Final phase, Chen announced to her team. Everyone to the escape pods. We got exactly 10 minutes before the entire station becomes uninhabitable. The remaining humans scattered to predetermined positions throughout the inner core. Each person had a specific role in the final plan, and each knew that failure meant not just their own death, but the eventual consumption of every world in Coalition space. Dr. Vasquez sealed herself in the central computer core with her viral program, uploading the neural disruptor now. When this hits their command ship, they'll lose coordination for approximately 30 seconds. That's all we need, Chen replied, taking her position at the manual firing controls. The station's automated systems had been stripped to power the gravity weapon, leaving everything dependent on human operators working in perfect coordination. Captain Webb's voice crackled over the communication system from the engine room, power levels at maximum. Sarah, when we fire this thing, we'll have about 90 seconds before the entire station tears itself apart. The escape pods are programmed to launch automatically, but someone needs to stay behind to maintain targeting, Chen finished. I know. The truth was, they all knew. The plan required manual adjustments throughout the acceleration phase, and the G-forces involved would make it impossible for anyone to survive in the control room. Someone had to sacrifice themselves to ensure the weapons stayed on target. Admiral Vextar's voice carried an emotion his species rarely displayed respect. Commander Chen, you and your team have already accomplished the impossible. You've proven that these entities can be fought. You don't need to. Yes, we do, Chen interrupted, because that's what humans do. We finish what we start. The Void Hunters reached the inner core just as the final countdown began. Mechanical forms poured through the corridors, their cutting beams slicing through barriers as they advanced toward the human positions. They had adapted to every weapon, every trap, every desperate defense the humans had used. But they had never encountered a weapon like Kepler Station itself. Initiating gravity field, Webb announced. The station shuddered as massive magnetic forces began building up around it. Power readings spiked beyond anything the structure was designed to handle, but human engineering held firm. The hunters inside the station suddenly found themselves pressed against bulkheads as artificial gravity increased exponentially. Their adaptive systems, designed to counter energy weapons and radiation, had no protocol for dealing with gravitational forces that could crush diamonds. Neural disruptor deployed, Dr. Vasquez reported. I'm detecting massive signal disruption in the Hunter command ship. They're losing coordination. Chen watched the tactical display as the enemy command vessel, suddenly cut off from its network units, began to drift slightly off course. It was a tiny change, but enough to create the opening they needed. All stations, fire. The gravity generators discharged every joule of power stored in Kepler Station systems. The massive structure, which had served as humanity's outpost in coalition space for over a decade, became a projectile moving at nearly 10% of light speed. The forces involved should have destroyed it instantly, but human engineering had accounted for the impossible. The station held together just long enough. Admiral Vextar and the Coalition fleet watched in stunned silence as Kepler Station, accelerated to impossible speeds, crossed the void between itself and the Void Hunter command ship in a matter of seconds. The collision released energy equivalent to a small stellar explosion, vaporizing both the station and the massive Hunter vessel in a bloom of superheated plasma that lit up the entire system. Without their command ship, the remaining Hunter units simply stopped. Their perfect adaptation protocols, dependent on networked intelligence, left them helpless without central coordination. Coalition ships moved in to mop up the scattered remnants, encountering no resistance from the once unstoppable enemy. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched for survivors among the escape pods, Admiral Vextar found himself studying the tactical recordings with new eyes. The humans had accomplished what the combined military might of 12 advanced civilizations could not. They had defeated the Void Hunters not through superior technology, but through superior thinking. Commander Sarah Chen was found in the last escape pod launched from Kepler Station, unconscious but alive. When she recovered 3 days later aboard a Coalition medical ship, she found Admiral Vextar waiting beside her bed. "Commander," the reptilian admiral said formally, "on behalf of the Stellar Coalition, I must apologize." Chen raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For treating your species as support personnel. For assuming that technological advancement was the only measure of military capability. For failing to understand that sometimes the most primitive solution is also the most effective." Chen smiled weakly. "Don't feel bad, Admiral. Most humans don't understand it either. We just get lucky sometimes." "Lucky?" Vextar's golden eyes showed confusion. "Commander, you sacrificed an entire space station, used biological warfare, and turned your own people into kinetic weapons. There was nothing lucky about your victory." "Maybe not," Chen admitted. "But there's something you need to understand about humans, Admiral. We didn't evolve on a nice, safe world like most Coalition species. Earth tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We learned to adapt, to improvise, to turn any disadvantage into an advantage. When you're fighting for survival, you learn that the only rule is to win." 3 months later, the Stellar Coalition formally invited humanity to join as a full-member species. The vote was unanimous. Earth's small fleet was integrated into Coalition defense forces, and human tactical doctrines were studied by military academies across known space. The Void Hunters never returned. Some said they had been completely destroyed, while others believed they had simply moved on to easier prey. But everyone agreed on one thing. When the galaxy faced its darkest hour, it was humanity that provided the light. Commander Sarah Chen was promoted to Admiral and given command of the Coalition's new rapid response fleet. Her first order was to establish training programs where alien officers could learn human military tactics. The courses were popular, though many students struggled with concepts like acceptable losses and victory through sacrifice. As Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her new flagship, watching mixed crews of humans and aliens work together, she reflected on the lessons learned at Kepler Station. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities. Humanity had found its place among the stars not as conquerors or victims, but as protectors willing to do whatever it took to defend what mattered. The Void Hunters had learned too late that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one who refused to accept defeat. In a universe full of advanced civilizations and impossible technologies, it was the species that still remembered how to fight dirty that made the difference. And humanity had always been very good at fighting dirty.